beat it into the heads of stubborn, sinful men how to guard and protect the precious gifts that God has given them, whether it's a family or whether it's in the form of the church.
Amen.
Thank you. And this is also this reporter's opinion. I think women, if I were to interpret him, are waiting for men to be men to do that.
Amen.
Yeah. If men would be men and learn how to love their wives as God loves the church, then it would be a different story than we have now. You said we can argue up and down, all this and this and that. I'm just... This is this reporter's opinion. This does not reflect the official teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, blah, 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 blah. Got it? Yes. But to me, you put it all together this way, it makes so much more sense. It makes so much more sense. Go ahead, Chris.
Microphone.
Oh, microphone. Here you go. Yes. Thank you, Luke. He gave us an extra long cord.
Thank you, Luke.
Actually, you sort of touched on the...
Closer.
Closer to your mouth. It has to be right on top of your mouth.
I have to look at my note too. Okay, kind of touched on what I had in mind in reference to Adam at your last point, because as you were speaking and you said the devil had tempted Eve, I was wondering, where was Adam? Where
With
was
her.
Eve?
Right next to her.
It said, because we read in chapter 24, the man shall cling to his wife.
Yes.
If it was there when it's supposed to be there, the devil wouldn't have had that kind of strong hold on the woman. Like you said, he would have protected her. Now, so you answered that part. Now, the other part of it I wanted to touch on is, it seems like there's a juxtaposition in Song of Songs, because from chapter 2, verse 7, we hear, do not awaken or stir up love until it is ready.
Yes.
This was the woman wanting the man.
Yes.
Literally.
Yes.
And the man clinging, doing the right thing this time, saying, no, stop. This is not the right time for it.
Yes.
Doing what Adam should have done.
Yes. Chris is going right to the head of class. You're getting the connection. Excellent connections there. Yes. That's where I'm going with all of this. We may go from Los Angeles to New York by way of India, but by golly, we'll get there. Right? Why are we going through all of this Adam and Eve stuff when we should be reading the Song of Songs? Because of the very thing that Chris pointed out. If we don't understand this, then when it comes to this, it makes more sense. That's what Adam should have been doing. Guarding and protecting chastity of the person he is with, a la in the Song of Songs. In the Song of Songs, the woman is desirous to be with the lover. And he says, don't inflame love until it is time. Because in chapters 1, 2, and 3, it's all about the leaving. It's all about the courtship. You don't want to stoke the fires of love too hard, lest you fall into temptation and sin. Once we get to the marriage, now you can fully enjoy and embrace love and drink richly and deeply like a good wine that love. And you enjoy it and savor it so much more. You with me?
Yeah.
That's where we're going with it. Tony. Can't hear you.
been talking about marriage love.
Yes.
And at the time of King Solomon, the 10th Commandment already took place.
Oh, yes.
And the 6th Commandment is that you shall not commit an adultery.
Yes.
And now with 400 wives, or 300 wives,
Right.
400, how do we judge that and how that commandment applied to Solomon at the time?
Right. Very good question.
I'm with you, Tony.
Yes. And again, remember at the beginning of Bible study, we somewhat addressed that. When we're looking at the Song of Solomon, if we take the perspective that it's Solomon who's writing it, the traditional view, we have to say to ourselves, of all people to try and talk to us about chaste love, he is the last person to do it. And my response is, even through that sinful man, God gives us an example of proper love, a proper, responsive, erotic love. And because of that, God is glorified. That's part of that answer. In terms of Solomon himself, it was because of all of his wives and concubines that he fell from the grace of God unto the, I want to say disrepute. He fell out of the grace of God because of that. Because his wives pulled him away to false gods. So if he had been chaste with one wife, that wouldn't have happened. Marie. I can't hear you.
But aren't the 400 wives metaphors for things, love of things?
You can see it that way, but in a literal sense, Solomon had all of these political marriages. And as a result, you saw what happened. Well, in the same way, if we're too attached to the things of the world, guess what happens? It pulls us away from God. So yes, there is an allegorical understanding of Solomon and his many wives. Gina, and then Rebecca.
Wasn't it said though that it was early on in his life also?
It was.
When he wrote this?
Yes, it was early on in his reign. No. If we were to interpret it based on the text, this was when he had only 60 queens. Only 60. Okay. But yes, in terms of 300, he was just a drop in the bucket.
But shouldn't these wives, these 60 wives, are alliances?
Yes, they're political. They're not a love relationship, they're political alliances. He probably never consummated with a lot of them. That's what they were, but nevertheless, they're there. Rebecca.
Okay. One thing that we keep hearing in today's culture is toxic masculinity. How do we fight it? How do we keep hearing about how men really shouldn't be men and there's really no difference between the genders. Obviously that's incorrect, but how do we really make the arguments so people might actually listen?
You know, it's interesting that you brought that up. She asked about toxic masculinity, in case you didn't hear it. How do we address it? The idea that our culture is trying to tell us that there's no difference between men and women. How do we address it? You know, I can't help but think about my first year at JP Catholic when I was doing my master's program, the very first course I took. And I remember Professor Barber talking about, and this was, 4 or 5 years ago when I first started. And he said, we had experienced the crisis in the church, similar, it wasn't, it was bad, but it was, and one of the things that he was saying was that the church has not done its job in properly catechizing about men and women, about gender and gender identity. It just has not done a good job. And as a result, the culture is taking over and dictating to us. And so what he called for in teaching all of us graduate students is that as we go out, we need to be the voice of what is gender and gender identity biblically in order to counter the culture. And this is part of it. What I'm doing here in talking about the Song of Songs is part of that, I hope, is in identifying there is a difference between men and women. And by the way, there is only men and women. God didn't make any mistakes. There are no mistakes. Do you understand that? There are no mistakes. Sin has clouded and confused things in our world today. When a child is born from the womb, what do we say?
Is it a boy or a girl?
It's a boy. It's a girl. Period. 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 Our biology has been determined, and it causes us to relate in that way. What our culture has done has confused us. Again, we're listening to the world, not to the scriptures.
It's called political correctness.
It's more than just political correctness. This has been since the dawn of time, but it's become such a confounding issue. I was just, before school started 2 weeks ago, we had a training, a sensitivity training. There are certain, you don't realize what kind of laws are now in place. Yes, if you're in a medical position, you would know. For example, a student, 15, 16, 17 years old, is in my classroom. If he's a boy, but he dresses and reacts as a girl, I am to call him a she. By law. To not to do so is to damage the child unnecessarily. If they identify as a girl, but they're biologically a boy, you are to encourage the identity by law. And we are to report if that child is being harassed, picked on, bullied, or otherwise being treated badly because of his gender choice. Fortunately, there's none of those in my class. However, that's one of the laws that we have got to deal with. This is not a minor issue, my brothers and sisters. So, I see a hand and I see a hand. I'm going to go, you first.
Go back to remember when God talked to he talked to Abraham, not Sarah. And that was a big mistake between Isaac and Isaac. You see the Palestinians until now they're crying because he did what his wife, she was saying, or he wanted him have sex with her handmaid. Yeah, okay. Yes. So this is one thing. And the second thing is because what is happening right now in schools is because they took God to the school.
It's more than that. It's more than that. I don't want it to reduce to something like that. It's too glib.
Before when they were doing the laws, they were praying here in the Constitution. They were praying before they make a decision. So God is completely like out of the picture. So for me, if I take out God, He's gonna keep my protection. I'm gonna be like a darkness on the world. The more relation I have with God, it's more successful I'm gonna be. Not like with the mind. I'm more successful than everything. Peace in my heart and everywhere I go. Because I have a relationship, I build a relationship with
let me interject here. I hear what you're trying to say, and I also want to be clear. I think it's more than this. I think it's too glib to just say, oh, it's because there's no prayer in school. I don't think that that's the mere issue of it, or just removing God from our schools. It's more than that. This is a deeper cultural understanding that's gone awry, that has not been addressed by the church. You know where I put the blame? On the church, for not properly teaching what it is that God has established between man and woman. So if we're having trouble with these kinds of laws, the only reason why I bring them up is to say that the culture is running away because it has nothing to stop it. And how do we stop it? Well, there's a political side to it, but that's not what I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is that we are not showing the love of God to all of these people. All of them. Including the ones that are he's that think they're she's. I think they need to be shown the love of God. And that doesn't mean you're a sinner and you're going to hell. That's the last thing they need to hear. What they need to know is that I love you and I want to know why you have this pain. Because I know personally transgendered people. And I can tell you this from personal experience in sitting down and talking to them. There is a deep, unspoken pain that they haven't told their psychologists about their own gender. They hate themselves, is what it really was. That's this reporter's opinion of the matter. And it's only by telling them the love of God has for them as they are is going to change that. Do you understand? They don't need to hear you're damned and you're going to hell. Everyone knows that about themselves. What they need to know is that God loves you. And that's what I'm getting. That's the moral I want to get to this story. Do you hear me, brothers and sisters? I don't want to just say that the world's going to hell in a handbasket and all is awful. No. What I want to say is that we have the answer. We have the love of God. And if we don't know that ourselves, how can we tell them? How can we